The fall of 1999 should have been the beginning of something beautiful for Detroit's gifted children. Dr. Martin Webb, retired MIT professor, had moved to the city with a mission to help underprivileged math prodigies reach their potential. Parents called him a saint. Universities called him a talent scout. But by 2005, 7 brilliant children had vanished from his study group, and it would take 19 years to understand that genius was being harvested, not nurtured. September 1999, Detroit, Michigan. Dr. Martin Webb's Victorian house on Boston Street looked like a grandfather's dream. Wraparound porch, garden gnomes, American flag waving gently. Inside, he'd converted the front parlor into a classroom. Whiteboards covering every wall, advanced calculus textbooks, 3 computers when most kids didn't have one. Webb, 64, silver-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of professor students remembered fondly. MIT credentials on the wall, photos with Nobel laureates, letters from grateful former students. His offer seemed too good to refuse. Free tutoring for mathematically gifted children from low-income families. No catch, no fees, just a retired professor wanting to give back. He worked with local schools to identify students, kids solving algebra in 4th grade, doing calculus by 7th, the ones whose parents couldn't afford Kumon or private schools, the ones whose gifts might otherwise be wasted. By October, he had 12 students coming twice a week. By December, parents were calling him a miracle worker. Jamal Robinson was the first to disappear. 13 years old, already accepted to a summer program at Johns Hopkins. His mother Denise worked 2 jobs, raised 3 kids alone. When Webb told her in March 2000 that Jamal had been offered a full scholarship to Phillips Exeter Academy, she cried, all expenses paid, even airfare. Webb handled all the paperwork, drove Jamal to the airport himself. Denise got letters for 3 months. Jamal was thriving, making friends, loving advanced physics. Then the letters stopped. Webb said this was normal, teenagers getting busy. Exeter had no record of Jamal Robinson. But here's what made Webb's operation different. He didn't take children immediately. He groomed families for months, sometimes years. Tutoring sessions, progress reports, parent conferences where he'd explain how special their child was, how they deserved better opportunities. He'd invite families for dinner, remember birthdays, attend school plays. By the time he suggested boarding school or special programs, parents trusted him completely. Why wouldn't they? He'd transformed their children's futures for free. Maria Santos disappeared in September 2001. 12 years old, solving differential equations, dreaming of NASA. Webb told her parents about a residential program at Caltech for exceptional young mathematicians, showed them glossy brochures, fake acceptance letters, even had Maria talk to someone claiming to be the program director on the phone. Her parents, immigrants from Guatemala, were so proud. Their daughter at Caltech. They signed custody papers Webb said were required for the program. Maria sent emails for 6 weeks, then silence. Webb said she'd been moved to an even more advanced program, very selective, no outside contact allowed. The pattern continued. David Kim, 2002, supposedly at a math institute in Switzerland. Ashley Thompson, 2003, full scholarship to a prep school in Vermont that didn't exist. Michael Brown, 2004, recruited by a tech company's youth development program. Each child carefully selected, brilliant at math, poor family, parents who trusted authority, no extended family asking questions. Webb provided enough communication to prevent immediate alarm, then gradually reduced contact until families accepted their children had moved on to better lives. But here's what changed everything. In 2005, Webb made a mistake. He targeted twins, Sarah and Samuel Okonkwo, 11 years old, both math prodigies. Their father, James, was different from other parents. Nigerian immigrant, yes. Working class, yes, but formerly a police officer in Lagos. When Webb suggested the twins had been accepted to separate elite programs, Sarah in California, Samuel in Massachusetts, James smelled something wrong. What program separates twins? Why couldn't he visit? Why were the phone numbers Webb provided always busy? James started investigating. The prep school in Vermont that Ashley Thompson supposedly attended, he drove there. It had been closed since 1987. The Caltech program Maria Santos joined, he called every department. No such program existed. The Swiss Mathematics Institute? The Swiss consulate had never heard of it. James went to the FBI in October 2005. They raided Webb's house 3 days later, but he was gone, cleaned out, no forwarding address, computers wiped, even the garden gnomes removed. The investigation revealed the scope: 7 children over 6 years, all vanished, all placed in prestigious programs. But where were they? Webb had disappeared so thoroughly that agents suspected he'd had an exit strategy for years. Bank accounts emptied gradually, house actually owned by a shell company, even his MIT credentials were partially fabricated, he'd audited courses, never graduated. The real Dr. Martin Webb had died in 1994. This Webb was someone else entirely, identity never determined. For 19 years the case went cold. Parents aged, hoping. Denise Robinson kept Jamal's room exactly as he'd left it. The Santos family put up billboards every year on Maria's birthday. The FBI kept the case open but had no leads. Webb was presumed dead or fled overseas. The children were presumed trafficked, dead, or living under new identities. 7 brilliant minds vanished into nothing. November 2024. Detroit was different now. Boston Street gentrified. Webb's Victorian house now split into condos. A young couple, the Johnsons, bought the top-floor unit, decided to renovate. When they opened a wall to expand the bathroom, they found something strange. A hidden compartment, professionally built, containing 7 file boxes wrapped in plastic, each labeled with a child's name, each containing something that would finally explain where 7 children had gone. The files weren't what investigators expected. No evidence of trafficking, no offshore accounts, no buyer information. Instead, contracts, legal documents between Martin Webb, educational consultant, and major technology companies. IBM, Microsoft, early Google, startups that became Fortune 500 companies. The contracts were for specialized cognitive resources and developmental assets. The language was deliberately vague, but the meaning became clear as investigators dug deeper. Webb hadn't sold the children. He'd leased them. The contract specified that the companies would receive access to unique problem-solving capabilities for specific projects. Payment went to offshore accounts in Webb's name. The children were listed as consultants or independent contractors. Their actual ages were never mentioned. The work they did was real: algorithm development, code optimization, mathematical modeling that helped build the early internet infrastructure. But where had they lived? How had companies not noticed they were children? The answer came from an unexpected source. In December 2024, a data analyst at Microsoft named Marcus Williams was reviewing old project files when he saw his own handwriting from 2001. But Marcus Williams was 37, which would have made him 6 in 2001. Except he remembered writing that code, remembered the windowless room, remembered Dr. Webb bringing meals, saying this was his special school, his important work. Marcus Williams was Jamal Robinson. The memories came back slowly, painfully. Webb had kept them in a compound in rural Michigan, told them their families had abandoned them, that the companies were their new families. The children lived in dormitories, worked 10-hour days, were taught that their mathematical gifts came with obligations. Some were told they were in witness protection, others that they were orphans Webb had saved. All were given new identities, complete backstories, false memories implanted through repetition and isolation. When each child aged out of usefulness, around 16 or 17, Webb would graduate them, give them new identities again, college admission papers, job references, and release them into the world believing they were foster kids who'd gotten lucky. Marcus Jamal had lived his entire adult life believing he'd grown up in foster care, won scholarships, made it through MIT on merit. The coding work he'd done as a child was buried in his memory as early gaming, something all kids did. The FBI located 4 more of the 7. Maria Santos was now Dr. Michelle Summers, working at NASA, exactly where she dreamed but with no memory of her real parents. David Kim was Daniel Kraft, Silicon Valley executive, 3 kids of his own. Ashley Thompson was Amanda Torres, teaching mathematics at Yale, had written papers on childhood amnesia, never knowing she was describing herself, but 3 were gone. Michael Brown's trail ended in 2006 with a death certificate, suicide at 17, a month after his graduation. Sarah Okonkwo died in 2008, car accident, living as Sophie Washington. Samuel Okonkwo was never found, no graduation records, no new identity, like he'd simply ceased to exist at some point in the compound. Webb himself was found living in Costa Rica as William Morris, 90 years old, dementia having erased whatever conscience he'd had. When arrested, he didn't remember the children, the scheme, even his own name. Bank records showed he'd made $12 million over 6 years, selling children's genius to tech companies. The companies claimed ignorance, settled lawsuits quietly, NDAs preventing full disclosure. The reunion between the surviving children and their biological parents was not what movies would suggest. Marcus Jamal met Denise Robinson at a neutral location. She was 67, had spent 23 years believing her son was dead or enslaved. He was 37, successful, married but with no emotional connection to this woman who claimed to be his mother. They were strangers united only by DNA and tragedy. Maria's Michelle was angry. She'd achieved her dream of NASA but through a path of exploitation and lies. Her parents had died believing she'd abandoned them. She had children who would never know their real grandparents. The life she'd built was real, but founded on fiction. How do you reconcile that? How do you mourn parents you don't remember while raising children who carry their genes? The compound in rural Michigan was excavated in 2025. Investigators found the dormitories, the workrooms, the classroom where Webb had reinforced false memories. They also found a cemetery. 17 small graves, suggesting Webb's operation had been longer than anyone knew. The 3 missing children from the known 7 were likely there, along with 14 others, never reported missing or lost in bureaucracy. The technology company's involvement was never fully exposed. Sealed settlements, destroyed records, executives who couldn't recall projects from the early 2000s. But code comments survived in legacy systems. A note here, a timestamp there, showing children as young as 11 had been debugging programs that became billion-dollar products. Their compensation, room, board, and false identities. Their recognition, none. Dr. Martin Webb, or whoever he really was, died awaiting trial in April 2025. His lawyer claimed dementia made him unfit, but prosecutors had recordings from the compound, his voice clear and professorial. Your mathematical gifts are divine. Your families couldn't nurture them. Here, you'll change the world. No one will know your names, but your work will live forever. The children's work did live forever, embedded in systems everyone uses, invisible signatures of stolen genius. Marcus Williams Jamal Robinson kept both names legally. He continued at Microsoft but donated his entire salary to finding missing children. He couldn't remember his real childhood, but he remembered the compound, remembered believing Webb was saving him. He testified before Congress about child labor in tech, about how easy it was to hide children in plain sight when you called them consultants and paid them in false identities. Maria/Michelle founded a non-profit identifying gifted children in poverty, providing legitimate scholarships, real opportunities. She kept her NASA position but wore 2 name tags, both persons she was and had been. Her children called their biological grandparents the lost grands, learned Spanish to connect with heritage their mother couldn't remember. The other survivors struggled differently. Some embraced their origins, others rejected them. All dealt with a unique trauma, not just kidnapping but the theft of identity so complete they'd lived decades not knowing they were stolen. They'd achieved their dreams through nightmare means, succeeded by being exploited, became who they'd wanted to be by losing who they were. The math tutor scheme revealed a horrifying truth about the early tech boom. How many algorithms were written by children? How many breakthroughs came from young minds trapped in compounds? Webb wasn't the only one. Investigators found evidence of similar operations in California, Texas, North Carolina, gifted children vanishing into special programs that were really labor camps for the digital age. Detroit rebuilt the Boston Street house into a memorial center, 7 trees for the known victims, 17 more for the unnamed graves, a plaque reading, "Genius isn't property, children aren't resources, families aren't replaceable." Inside, photos of the children at the ages they disappeared, next to age-progressed images of who they might have been. The real survivors sometimes visit, trying to bridge the gap between the children in photos and the adults they became. The last diary entry found in the compound, written by Samuel Okonkwo before he disappeared. Dr. Webb says we're special, that our math saves the world, but I dream about my mom's jowl of rice. You can't solve that with equations. Sarah says we'll go home someday. I'm starting to forget what home means. Maybe that's the point. Maybe forgetting is the final math problem, and once we solve it, we graduate. He never graduated. His grave was the smallest in the compound cemetery. He'd been 13, brilliant at mathematics, dead from untreated appendicitis because Webb couldn't risk hospitals. His twin Sarah survived 3 more years before her accident. Their father James never stopped searching, died in 2023 believing they were alive somewhere. They'd been dead before he even started looking, their genius extracted, their bodies discarded, their identities erased in service of progress that never knew their names.